Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for taking time out of your Saturday to join us and for this webinar. Can everybody hear me? If you can, just go ahead and type yes into the chat column over on the side. Fantastic. All right, amazing. We've got so many people on the line with us today. That's really amazing. So I want to give everybody just a couple of minutes as they're trickling in. So while we wait, where is everybody calling in from today? I'm in Chicago, where it is actually a beautiful cloudless day, so it's very weird for Canada. Very nice. Michigan, hi Heather. Long Beach, California, very nice. Nova Scotia, Mexico City, Indiana, next door neighbor. Wisconsin, another next door neighbor. Seattle, New York, North Carolina, wow, all over. Thousand Oaks, California. Very jealous of all you California folks. 15 inches of snow last week. Wow. So far, not too much for us in Chicago, but I'm sure it's just a matter of time. I hope everybody had a good holiday season and a great celebration to bring in the new year. Florida, very nice, very nice. All right, well, we'll go ahead and get started. So again, if you've just joined us, thank you so much for taking time out of your Saturday to talk about New Year's resolutions and how to actually accomplish them and write that book that you have dreamed about. So let's get started. Once I hit the right key. There we go. All right. So for those of you who may not know me, I'm Dani Alcorn, and I am the Chief Operating Officer at Writing Academy. I also teach courses on there specifically in screenwriting, and I also teach classes with my dad in a variety of our genre courses like mystery writing, science fiction, young adult. And these are some of the books and screenplays that I've written, which includes a screenwriting textbook, which is coming soon in 2019. Now, for those of you who are maybe not as familiar with Writing Academy, we are an online school and community. We offer classes in fiction and nonfiction, as well as screenwriting. And over the last decade, we've taught more than 30,000 students how to structure and publish their manuscripts. And if you do want to find out more about our organization, you can visit us online at writingacademy.com. But for now, I just want to take care of some housekeeping things about this particular live training that we're doing today. First, when it comes to questions, I will be presenting the webinar. Steve Alcorn is also with us today, who will be monitoring the chat over on the right-hand side of the screen. And also, if you scroll down below where this video is, you'll see that there is a section specifically for questions. So you are more than welcome to, as we go, type in questions down there, and Steve will answer them as we go. And I would love to answer as many questions at the end of the webinar as possible as well. We've got over 200 attendees, so I'm expecting some good ones. So jot them down as you go. Don't worry, there'll be time to answer them. We will also be sending out a link to download the slides, so you don't have to worry about taking copious notes on all of this. You'll be able to download it later. And on that note as well, there's a lot of information packed into this webinar. And I don't want to take up too much of your time, so I'm going to move pretty quickly. But there will be a replay available that will be emailed out later this afternoon, just as soon as the video is finished processing. So you can watch it again if you'd like to revisit anything or take some more notes for yourself. And at the end of the webinar, we also do have an exclusive New Year's resolution offer for you, so stay tuned for that. All right, let's get started. So during this training, we are specifically going to cover how to set resolutions you can actually keep, and then how to achieve those goals that you set as your resolutions. So first, let's tackle resolutions. Who has ever made a New Year's resolution before? Go ahead and type yes over in the chat if you've made a New Year's resolution this year or any year. Yep, lots of resolutions. All right. How many of you have made a writing-related resolution? Seeing some more yeses. Me, yep, so many. All right. And now, how many of you have failed to keep a resolution, whatever it was in the past at some point? Fell off the wagon some way. Yep, really common. That's kind of what one of the problems is with resolutions, is that it's easy to start out January really strong, feeling like, oh yes, I have all this energy and all these goals and it's a fresh year and a new start. And then you peter out. And there are a couple of reasons why that could happen. So we're going to talk about it. But first, I want to show you a really common resolution, which is to write more. Now, how many of you have made this resolution at some point? Yep. Yes, definitely. This is one of the most common resolutions that writers make, but it's tough to achieve. Now, what about this resolution makes it so difficult to keep up, to maintain? Anybody got too vague? Yep, very vague, not measurable. Yep, you guys are great. So yes, so this resolution is definitely too vague, and it's not smart. And this is one of the best ways to structure your resolutions and your goals. So a SMART goal consists of 5 things, which the acronym will give away. So the first thing that a good resolution or goal has to be is it has to be specific. So the problem with that write more resolution is that it is too vague. What are you going to write? How much are you going to write? What does it even mean? So here's some examples of how to improve upon that resolution. Write a novel. I will write more often. Those are ways to make things specific. When you know exactly what it is that you are trying to achieve, it is much easier to create a plan to achieve it. The other one I saw is that the goal has to be measurable. That was the other thing I saw somebody say that this write more goal lacked. And that's true. How do you quantify when you have written more? What is the measurement you are taking against that? What means success and what means improvement is needed? So here's some measurable goals that you could use. I will complete my novel. I will write every day. Now, the other thing about this that is, when you're making a resolution, that I think is one of the hardest things in January when you are full of, the urge to do it and the urge to make a resolution and you've got big dreams, is that you do want to make sure that what you are choosing is attainable. Because if you set yourself up for failure in the beginning of the year, of course you're going to peter out. Nobody goes from a couch potato to a marathon runner in the month of January. That's something that takes months and months and months. And so does achieving your writing goals of creating, either completing a manuscript or getting into the habit of daily writing. It's going to take a while. And so you want to make sure that the goal that you set for yourself is actually attainable. And so you want to make sure that you can realistically write as much as your goal says that you will, and that you can set aside as much time as you're saying that you will. If I were going to resolve that I was going to spend 6 hours every day writing, that's not a particularly attainable goal for me, because I have a job, I have a family, I have things to do. I don't have 6 hours a day to devote to that. On the other hand, if I said that I was going to write for 15 minutes every day, that's probably something that I can carve out of my day, and I bet a lot of you can too. Page and word counts are also a really great way. You can set those daily or weekly or monthly. I'm seeing a lot of really great ideas over there in the chat, so I hope people are keeping an eye on that as well. The fourth thing is that you want to make sure that the goal is relevant to you. Now, this one is probably the easiest because chances are, if you're here watching this live training, there's a reason that writing is a relevant goal for you. You have something that you want to accomplish, whether it's a specific project or you want to see your manuscript published, you want to see it available on Amazon, whatever it is. It's great to keep in mind what that big picture thing is, because if things get tough in the middle of the year or after a few weeks of doing it, your motivation starts to lag. If you remind yourself what the ultimate goal is, it's a way to recapture this excitement that you have now in January as you're thinking about the whole year laid out ahead of you and all of the things that you can do. So if you just remind yourself what's at the end of that whole process, that's a really great way to hang on to this January oomph that you have right now. And the last thing that you want to do is make sure that your goal is time bound. And that means that it's going to be accomplished within some set amount of time. Now, resolutions are great because they kind of have this baked into it as well, where you've got a resolution for 2019, which is 1 calendar year. However, I actually am going to suggest that you take that big goal and you break it into smaller pieces that can be achieved more as you go and keep track of how much farther you've come, rather than just having this one very amorphous, big term goal for the entire year of completing a manuscript or something like that. So here basically is a summary of that. Write more, not a good resolution. However, something like I will complete my novel in 2019 is a specific, measurable, attainable, time-bound goal that matters to you, so it is also relevant. Same thing could be said for something like I will write for 15 minutes every day in 2019, or I will write 500 words a day in 2019. That is, again, something that is specific and measurable, attainable, time-bound, and very, very relevant. But here are some more tips for creating effective New Year's resolutions. One of them, and as a writer this may seem obvious, but actually write it down, whether that's physically sticking it on a sticky note next to your desk or keeping it digitally on a file that you have. Write that resolution or goal down because it keeps you accountable. It's a constant reminder that there's this thing that you are trying to achieve, and that actually, it does so much. So the other thing to write down is why this is a valuable goal. And again, this is specific to you. So there's lots of reasons why you might want to write a book. You might have a specific story that you're trying to tell. You might want to see your book published on Amazon. You might want to write a memoir and share it with your grandkids or your kids for the next generation. So whatever it is specifically to you that is really at the root of why you want to tell this story. And if you're familiar with our dramatic elements, I'm really talking about your passion here. And if you, again, write that down, it's a great way to pick up motivation whenever you're feeling a little bit lazy, like you don't want to do it that day or something like that. It's a great way to remind yourself of what the end goal is. And then the last thing is to make an action plan. And part of that is breaking down your big goal into a bunch of smaller goals. And that's one of the best ways to achieve success, because the number one way to be successful as a writer is to have a plan. So breaking your goal down into smaller steps is the best place to start, because then you can tackle them one at a time, which feels way more achievable than starting with 0 pages and deciding that you're going to write an entire novel. Instead, if you break that novel down into a series of smaller things, like I'm going to come up with an idea, I am going to create a character sketch, I'm going to write an outline. That is the best way to stay motivated, because you can literally make yourself a checklist and check items off as you complete them, so that you can see how far you've come. And that is hugely motivating. That's one of the biggest things that I struggle with halfway through a project. If I have not kept track of how much I have already accomplished, I focus too much on how much I have left to do, rather than reflecting on how much I've already done. And so occasionally when I stop and think about something that I'm working on and realize that, 6 months ago I had nothing, or I've learned so much or done so much, that really motivates me. So I think that having that checklist and knowing all of the things that you have accomplished already can be hugely motivating. And then the other thing that's important to do as you think about resolutions is to build it into your schedule. And these are really, having a plan and having time to do it are the two things that are necessary. Because if you have time and no plan, you're not going to be very productive. But if you have a plan and no time, you're not going to make very much headway on it. So actually block off time on your calendar, whether it's every week, every day, every month, whatever it is. And again, be realistic. Commit to an amount of time that you can actually sustain throughout the year. That's what's more important. If you're going to tackle something big, like writing a manuscript or improving your daily writing habits for an entire year, is that it does have to be sustainable. For those of you who may have participated in our NaNoWriMo challenge back in November, that's a very ambitious goal that is taken on under a very small amount of time. And it does help you improve daily writing habits, but it would be very difficult to maintain that level of writing all year long unless it was your full-time job. So that's why if you're tackling a resolution, you want to take it in bite-sized chunks and make sure that you will be as motivated and excited about this in December as you are right now. And then my last piece of advice is just that you should write when you know that you'll be the most productive. And I think a lot of people jump to the assumption that if they're trying to carve out more time in their day, obviously the thing that they should do is get up an hour early to do it. And if you're a morning person, that's great. You should absolutely do that. But if you're not a morning person, like myself, if you try and start your day an hour early, chances are you're just going to be cranky and unproductive. So it is in your best interest to take a look at your actual rhythms and when you're productive and find a time for you that really will be productive as you work on it so that you don't feel like you're spinning your wheels or not being productive as you go. So the other thing that I want to leave you with today is a quick overview of story structure. Because like I was mentioning in breaking things down into a more manageable chunk, that is kind of what story structure automatically does for you. So in the Writing Academy courses, we teach 9 checkpoints of story structure, and they break down into 3 acts. And if you're following along with that, it sounds a lot like an outline, and it sounds a lot like smaller pieces that you can break your goals down into. So particularly in January, I love to kind of remind myself that yes, you're writing a complete manuscript, but you really can break it down into these pieces and have a real sense of accomplishment as you move through them. So I want to walk you through those 9 story structure checkpoints. But first, before we can do that, I want to reinforce one vital concept that is important for all writers of any genre. Doesn't matter if it's fiction, nonfiction, memoir, this is important. Plot is physical and story is emotional. Now, the thing about that is that these words are often used interchangeably, but there is a difference that is important for writers, and it comes down to that difference between physical stuff and emotional reactions to things. So here's what I'm talking about. Plot is your protagonist's physical journey. It's how they get from point A to point B. Now, if you're writing a fiction novel, it's easy to see how that applies. If you're writing memoir, it's how you move through the steps of your life. But even if you're working on nonfiction, plot is all the stuff that happens. It's the details, it's the history, it's the things that connect the dots. But story is your protagonist's emotional journey. It's how they change over the course of your manuscript. So in a fiction book, it's how they overcome their flaw and triumph at the end. In a memoir, it's how you as a person grow and evolve from the beginning to the end. And in the best nonfiction, it still manages to convey a sense of story, a sense of this change and this emotional resonance with the audience. You can think of it this way. Plot is equivalent to action, and story is equivalent to reaction. So something happens, and your protagonist or yourself, if you're writing a memoir, has an emotional reaction to that. It's this constant flow back and forth of action, reaction, action, reaction. And that's what propels all the way through the manuscript. There's always this balance of stuff happening to the emotional reaction. So story lets us get to know your character in a way that plot doesn't. Plot lets us know what's going on, but story lets us know what makes your character tick. So here's some examples of how certain projects can be either plot heavy, story heavy, or how a balance of them can actually be best. So if you've got a James Bond novel, there's a lot of plot. There's a lot of action. He does a lot of things. There's a lot of hijinks. There's a lot of stunts. And that's all very plot. We don't know too much about the emotional reaction of James Bond to anything. On the flip side of that, you have Twilight, which is very story heavy, spends a lot of time inside the protagonist, Bella Swan's head, and there's not too much plot that's going on. Harry Potter, on the other hand, is a great example of something that balances plot and story throughout all 7 volumes of the series. And that balance is what really marks excellent writing because you have both. You don't spend too much time in a bogged down story where nothing is happening, and yet you still care about the characters inside of an exhilarating and exciting and compelling plot or physical journey. So with that in mind, again, remember, plot is physical and story is emotional. But that kind of leads into the rest of what is vital for structuring your manuscript, because this plays directly into the dramatic elements. And the dramatic elements are made up of 4 things. So I talked about your passion a little bit already, actually, and that's why you want to tell this story or accomplish this resolution or this goal that you've set for yourself. It's the thing that is going to keep you excited about the project all year long, or however long it takes you to complete it. The theme is, the theme is what your reader takes away from it. So your passion may or may not ever be directly revealed to your reader, but the theme is what they will take away from it. And usually themes boil down to pretty simple statements. If your theme is paragraphs long, chances are there's actually some underlying kernel that it really is. So themes are things like love conquers all, or believe in yourself, or the importance of overcoming prejudice, things like that. And those grow out of your character's flaw. And your character's flaw is something where at the beginning of the manuscript, they have this fundamental character flaw that they are unable to overcome, and they will not be able to triumph in whatever situation they're in, whatever plot, whatever antagonist they're facing. The reason that they are not able to triumph on page 1 is because of this character flaw. So those are the elements that build into your premise. And your premise is what ties them all together. And that is a succinct statement of what your manuscript is about. And there's actually a really easy template for it. And it sounds a little repetitive, but there's a reason. So the template is that what if a flawed protagonist encountered some problem and had to overcome their flaw in order to solve the problem? Now, the problem and the flaw are mentioned twice in that, but the reason is that it really, really, really focuses you on how the flaw prevents them from overcoming the problem and how overcoming the flaw allows them to solve the problem, which will tie into your story structure checkpoints. So some flaws that are really common in all kinds of genres are lack of self-confidence, which is doubt about one's abilities, lack of self-worth, which is doubt about one's value, or insecurity, which is doubt about one's situation. Those are 3 that are very closely related to one another, but do result in subtle differences when used in the manuscript. For example, look at the difference between lack of self-confidence, which is about a sense of agency, versus a lack of self-worth, which is a doubt about one's value. So those are going to result in very different epiphanies and very different things that the protagonist struggles with, even though they seem closely related to one another. Other really common flaws are things like naivete, which is not understanding how the world works. And then again, 2 more closely related ones are inability to put the past behind and an inability to face the past. Now, the difference is that with an inability to put the past behind, you have a character who dwells and ruminates on things that have happened in the past that they're not able to move past. On the flip side, an inability to face the past means that the protagonist is unwilling to examine some previous thing that happened in order to acknowledge it, move past it, something like that. There are also some flaws that can come off as a little bit unsympathetic, like prejudice or stubbornness, but can also lead to really powerful narratives when they are successfully overcome. So the other thing that's important to know about these flaws is that these are not behaviors. Behaviors can stem from these. For instance, a person who lacks self-confidence can be very timid and not speak up, but the not speaking up isn't the flaw. The flaw is the lack of self-confidence. And again, we talked about how these play into the premise, which is what if a flawed protagonist encounters some problem and has to overcome the flaw to solve the problem? And again, I'm going to talk about this. I'm going to revisit this actually after we go through the 9 story structure checkpoints to explain again why it's a little bit repetitive. So we've got 3-act structure, which I mentioned before as well when we were talking about breaking your resolution, your goal down into bite-sized pieces. So 3-act structure has been around basically as long as humans have been telling stories. So it is this increasing, rising action over the course of Act 1, Act 2, and then it peaks in Act 3 at the climax, and then quickly resolves as the manuscript or novel comes to an end in Act 3. And this is a traditional view of 3-act structure, but actually 3-act structure really looks more like this, because it's not constantly escalating. The readers and your characters need breaks. They need small respites to rest and reflect on what's happening. And so you end up actually with more of this jagged line going up across the acts as the tension increases, so that each peak is higher than the peak before it, but you do have these brief periods of rest. And we've added 9 story structure checkpoints on top of this 3-act structure that explain what's happening in each of the acts, because each act has a very specific goal and represents a very specific point in time in your protagonist's journey. So let's talk about those in a little bit more detail, beginning with Act 1. So the 3 checkpoints in Act 1 are the hook, backstory, and trigger. Now, the hook is basically just what it sounds like. It is something to grab your reader's attention. It is usually just the first brief part of your manuscript. It could be as short as a single sentence, a paragraph at the most, probably a couple of pages to a short first chapter. But its real goal is to introduce your protagonist in a compelling way and drop your reader into the middle of some action or some dialogue that they have to keep reading to figure out what's going on, and piques their interest and raises some story questions that will keep them turning pages. The bulk of Act 1 is actually made up of the next checkpoint, which is the backstory. And this is your chance for your readers to get to know your character. It can include some of their actual backstory, things that are relevant to, them and who they are today in terms of, where they grew up or what their job is or things like that, what their relationship status is. But the backstory with a capital B is also about setting up your world. This is particularly important if you're writing in a genre like science fiction or fantasy, where you're going to have to do a lot of world building. But even if you're writing something that is a memoir or real, it is still a chance to set the stage for a specific time or to convey your character's specific situations. I see a question in there about prologues, and I will talk about that at the end of this, so hold tight, Brian. So once in the backstory, you have established all of that. You've basically laid the groundwork for anything that is important for your reader to know right up front. Other details about your protagonist will, of course, continue to be revealed throughout all 3 acts, so you don't have to cram everything into it, but it's sort of the beginning of it. So the final checkpoint of Act 1 is the trigger. Now, the trigger is a moment of plot. That is why I emphasized the difference between plot and story so much at the beginning of this, because plot elements are stuff that happens. So the trigger is a plot moment and is an event that happens to your protagonist that directly attacks their character flaw. And they are unable to overcome that character flaw. So whether it's lack of self-confidence or an inability to put the past behind them, whatever it is, this trigger picks at it. It's something that happens. It's not an action that the protagonist takes. It happens to them. So that's your Act 1. That's where your Act 1 ends, is with this moment of plot. Act 2 begins with an emotional reaction or a moment of story that is brief and internal. And that's the crisis. And I like to think of this as a chance for the character to have an epiphany. Of course, they don't, or your manuscript would be over. But they are unable to overcome whatever this flaw is, and their flaw overcomes them. They don't believe in themselves, they lack confidence, and they are unable to take some action that would solve the problem and end, defeat the antagonist and end the story right there. And so that is a moment of story. And so the trigger and the crisis are both short. They're essentially two halves of one short scene, if you will. And the crisis launches your protagonist into the middle of Act 2, which is the struggle. And if you think back to that diagram that I showed, the struggle makes up the bulk of Act 2. And it is plot complication after plot complication. Things get worse and worse and worse for your protagonist. Things just escalate and escalate and escalate. The antagonist is in there actively working against your protagonist, and the tension rises and rises and rises until finally there's something that finally is the straw that breaks the proverbial camel's back. And the protagonist finally, at long last, experiences their epiphany, which is another internal moment of story and emotion. But this time, unlike the crisis where they are not able to recognize and overcome their flaw, they finally realize, this whole time I've lacked confidence. And if only I believed in myself, I would be able to do XYZ. And that realization is what ends Act 2 and propels them into Act 3, where the tension continues to rise throughout the plan. Now, the plan is the first checkpoint of Act 3. And what it means is that now, finally, at long last, as a result of the protagonist recognizing their flaw, they are able to do something that they were not able to do prior to that epiphany. And they are able to come up with a plan to defeat the antagonist. Of course, the first plan may not work. There may be several plans that they have to get through before the one that finally works. But ultimately, it's the result of the realization of the flaw that allows them to construct this plan and build towards the climax. Now, the climax is the checkpoint that is the point of highest tension in your manuscript, because this is where the antagonist will finally be defeated. So, the antagonist also has a character flaw, and ultimately the antagonist's character flaw is what results in their own downfall. So the protagonist sets up a situation and climax because of the epiphany that they've had, and the antagonist is unable to change and recognize their flaw, so they are defeated in that climax. And that is the emotional payoff of the manuscript. So this whole time we've been tracking along with your protagonist, rooting for them to defeat the antagonist, and at long last, in the climax, it finally happens. Once that antagonist has been defeated, the tension very quickly ebbs from the manuscript. And so the ending usually wraps up pretty quickly after that. So there isn't too much that you want to belabor after that. It's your chance to tie up loose ends and send your characters off into the proverbial sunset. So that is a quick overview of the 3-act structure. So again, the reason that the premise, which you come up with way before you start any of this, is so repetitive is because the flaw and the realization of it are directly tied to the problem. So you've got this flaw that prevents you from doing something, prevents you from overcoming the problem. And then realizing it allows you to do something. So that's an important relationship to remember, and it's really good to know that up front. Now, as you look at this outline and think about a resolution and breaking it down, doesn't this nicely fit into actionable chunks that you can accomplish and check off as you go? So another couple of common questions that we get about acts and checkpoint is basically, how long is an act? And the answer is it varies depending on the genre and the particular story that you're telling. Act 2 in general tends to be the longest, and Act 3 tends to be the shortest. However, in something that was like an action-adventure novel, Act 3 could be quite long if there are multiple plans that have to be tried before the one that finally succeeds. And occasionally, Act 1 is incredibly short. if it launches the protagonist into the struggle very, very early. And then as for the checkpoints, those also vary in length as well. So the longest checkpoint is the struggle. That'll be the bulk of your manuscript, especially it's almost the entirety of Act 2, because the crisis and epiphany are very short internal moments. The trigger and the hook are also short moments of plot. The backstory varies in length, the plan varies in length, and even the climax can vary a fair amount. And the ending, you don't want to let that get too long because you don't want readers to be bored after the emotional payoff. Now, Brian, here's about the prologue or the epilogue. So prologues and epilogues are frowned upon by editors and publishers because they are usually an attempt to fix some problem with the manuscript that could have been more effectively handled within the 9 checkpoints. So that's something that is trying to set up more information. So the most common one, I would say, is probably a prologue, because you as the author know something that your reader doesn't, and you want to tell them what it is. However, my advice in that situation is don't. Don't tell them. The reader doesn't need to know, especially if the protagonist doesn't know themselves. It is much more interesting to experience learning that information through the protagonist's viewpoint and get their emotional reactions to it along with it. And a prologue can also bog down the first pages of your manuscript and get in the way of that hook if it's not exciting, if it's not actionable, and especially if it's taking place many years before. You don't want the reader to bond with the wrong character, because that's kind of our, when we open up the pages of a book, we're looking for who the story is about. We very quickly bond with whoever that protagonist is and are going to root for them. So if there's a different character in your prologue or no character at all, we're going to be struggling to find who that is. And if we bond with the wrong one, then it's an uphill battle to get your readers to care about the character who's actually your protagonist. Similarly, with an epilogue, you don't want to drag things out too long because after the emotional payoff of the climax, you have a limited amount of time that your readers will continue to be interested in the character because they just want them to ride off into the sunset. All right. Now, I would love to answer any questions you have about that material because I know I went through it really fast. So I have seen some great questions going by in the chat that Steve has been answering, and I hope you've also been putting questions down below the video feed there as well. So at the end, I will pop down there, answer those questions, keep putting those questions in there and in the chat as well, and we will talk about them. But first, before we do that, I want to talk about the offer that we have exclusively for Writing Academy students right now today. And that is a subscription to our Authors Success Bundle, which is our all-course subscription. So you get access to all 12 of our writing workshop courses. And if you're not familiar with them, I want to take a little bit of time to tell you about why this is one of my favorite ways that students can take advantage of the content in our courses. So this bundle is great because it allows you to launch your writing career. This offer allows you to save money doing it, and you can learn on your own schedule and ultimately earn unlimited free lifetime access to all of the courses. But by getting all of them at once, you have access to so many different topics, so many different genres, that whatever you're working on, you will find something in there that can help you accomplish your goals. So in this bundle, as I mentioned, you get access to 12 of our most popular courses, and they're in a wide variety of genres. We do fiction, we do nonfiction. So this is kind of how a breakdown of the courses would go. Your journey starts in the beginning writer's workshop, which goes over the fundamentals of the 3-act structure like I just raced through. And then you get a more detailed look at that in novel writing workshop, as well as specific and actionable techniques that you can use to elevate your writing. Things like scene and sequel, things like how to create conflict, clock, and action, how to write big and write well. And then we also offer specific genre classes. Right now, young adult fiction and writing science fiction and fantasy are two of the most profitable and best-selling genres out there. So we offer courses in there that again focus on the story structure concepts, but also go into depth for specific genre considerations and pull examples from best-selling and excellent genre fiction in those categories. Similarly, we also offer a mystery writing workshop. And honestly, this is kind of applicable no matter what genre you're writing in, because mystery is an element of basically all successful fiction, memoir, and even sometimes nonfiction. So this course has information about how you create senses of mystery, how you plot the perfect crime and work backwards from a crime scene if you're leaving clues, which is one of the most difficult things that you can do, is you want the mystery to be solvable, but not so easy to be solved that they get it on the first page. We also offer courses specifically in writing for children. So a lot of people are interested in writing stories for their kids or grandkids, and that is a great way to learn how to write everything from a beginning picture book all the way up through a middle grade or young adult novel. And for New Year's resolution folks, the creative writing projects, I think, is a really great place to start in particular, because it gives you a structure week by week for how to tackle a project. So if you're looking for a little bit more of that achievable, check them off structure, creative writing projects is where you'll find it. We also offer courses in nonfiction, because nonfiction writing is very profitable. Of course, there are people out there who make very lucrative careers writing fiction, but it is a lot easier to make a writing career writing nonfiction. And there's lots of different ways that you can do that. You can write nonfiction books, you can write articles for magazines, online publications, and things like that. And another really common thing that people want to write, especially after the holiday season, is a memoir. Write your life story. It's a chance to kind of reflect on, we've all just spent time with our families. We've seen, people that we don't get to see that often. And so I think there's, in January, often a lot of kind of good feelings about writing a life story. And so writing a memoir is a great gift that you could give next holiday season for your friends and family. I also teach screenwriting courses, including a general screenwriting workshop and an adapting novel to screenplay course. The screenwriting workshop is great because if you have a novel, you can adapt it yourself into a screenplay, which is an excellent set of skills to have in your tool belt should you ever be approached by an agent or producer who's looking to turn your novel into a movie or TV show. And then finally, of course, the thing that we are all here for is getting published. And so all of these courses build towards the grand finale, which is our Publish Your Book Now course, which will talk about self-publishing and getting your work available on Amazon by the end of the day to millions of readers. The experience, if you've not had the chance to take one of our video-based courses before, every lesson includes video-based instruction from either myself or Steve. Every lesson also includes a discussion area where you can interact with fellow students or ask us questions. And we are in there practically every day answering questions for students. So we really want you to have access to our expertise and your fellow students at all times. So every lesson has a discussion area where you can do that. And like I mentioned, you can learn at your own pace. When you have access to these courses, they are just there for you. You have access to any lesson at any time. You never have to wait for some arbitrary amount of time before the next lesson opens up for you, and you never have to worry about losing access to a lesson after some arbitrary amount of time has passed. So that means that you can take them on your own time and adjust as your commitments throughout the year change. You can also learn your way. Our courses are all available on desktop, but they're also available on mobile and most tablets as well, so you can learn wherever and whenever you want. And finally, this is a bundle that is great for everyone. It's good for first-time authors. If you've never written manuscript before, you will find all kinds of information to help get you started. But it is also good for authors who have written before and just need to work on an unfinished manuscript or work on a manuscript that needs polishing. You'll find techniques in there that will give you tools to take a step back, look at your manuscript, and figure out where there are places for improvement. And of course, this bundle is great for any author who wants to get published. Every course talks about publishing, talks about marketing, talks about querying agents if you're seeking to pursue traditional publishing. So you'll get actionable advice whether you want to pursue traditional publishing or self-publishing. And it will talk about the pros and cons of both of those as well, because there are reasons to go one way or the other. So you also can earn lifetime access to all of these, which I mentioned at the beginning. So the way that that works is once you complete every course in the bundle, your subscription will become free for life, which means that you will have access to all of the courses, no fees attached, for as long as you want them. So that is always also a really great motivator as you're thinking about these resolutions. But even if you're not interested in all of those courses, right now we are actually offering a special offer for New Year's resolutions that will appeal. So it's an exclusive New Year's resolution discount. Normally, a monthly subscription to our Author Success Bundle costs $99 a month, but right now you can enroll for just $19 a month. This discount is only valid until January 6th, but right now you can enroll for $19 a month. And in fact, I am going to go ahead and post this offer link into the chat there so that you can get to it. And actually, if someone could click on that and make sure that it's working and just type yes in there if you can get to it, that'd be great. I just want to make sure that you guys can get there. But at $19 a month, even if there is only a handful of courses that you are interested in, this is still the best deal all year that we offer for getting those courses. And yeah, if somebody can just check that that link is working, I want to make sure. All right. Great. Thanks, PJ. So now, what questions? Oh, thanks, Dwayne. Good. I'm so glad that that's working. So yeah, so that link again, it's bit.ly, that's bit.ly/writing-academy-19. And then we've got that over there in the chat for you. So now I would love to answer any questions. I know that Steve has been answering these as we go, but if anybody has questions that have not been answered, you can look down at the question area underneath this for that. You can also post things over in the chat if there's anything. All right, Valerie asks, will we pay $19 for how long? So you can pay $19 a month for as long as you want, cancel at any time. So once you complete every course in the bundle, you stop paying. You email us, let us know that you've completed every course, and your subscription's free for life. If you want it for 1 month, you have it for 1 month, and you can cancel your subscription. So it is whatever you are, whatever helps you accomplish your goals. That was one of the reasons why we actually did add some more classes to this bundle in the past year, and we're talking about what, we were going to run this New Year's resolution special again, and we thought about raising the price, but we really just wanted to give everybody who has, who has a manuscript in mind, who wants to accomplish something, a really affordable way to take advantage of that. So if you're interested in taking all of the classes, that's great. But at this price point, if you're only interested in a couple, it's also a great opportunity. I already have 3 of them, so you can finish earlier. Yes, that's true. All right, the 15 minutes could be either editing or adding new content. I have heard that you should read what you have written in your past session and then write new content after that. What do you think? I think you should do whatever works for you, Brian. You don't want to get into the trap of just editing your content over and over again without making forward progress. So personally, what I usually do is that I can't just sit down and start typing. I do need a little bit of a ramp up to remember where I was. So I will usually go back maybe a page or 2 and reread that and just kind of remind myself where I was in the process and then start from there. But I try not to edit too much and maintain that forward momentum until I get to the end of the manuscript. Allison, the sci-fi fantasy class is really great. It's one of my favorites as well. It talks a lot about world building, which I think is one of the most interesting things. And honestly, the techniques in that for world building, they work even if you're, if you're tackling fantasy, if you're tackling sci-fi. It has a lot of great concepts about things to think about in terms of setting up rules, for things like how magic works or how time travel works or how faster than light travel, something like that, because you want to establish really clear-cut rules like that so that you don't have the plot hole problem. What do I think of Hemingway's advice? Write drunk, edit sober. Well, I think that actually I was a psychology major in college, and so actually you're supposed to state-dependent memorize things. But I don't necessarily recommend editing drunk either. But I do think it works if you're Hemingway. So that's actually a really interesting question, because to take it a little seriously, writing drunk and editing sober, basically being drunk lowers your inhibitions. And so I actually have found that, unfortunately, my most productive time to write is in the middle of the night, because when you get sleepy, it does the same thing. And so it turns off your internal critic to a certain extent, and it's easier to make forward progress. So I don't necessarily recommend that for your liver, but I do think it's interesting that once you figure out that, like, that's why it's difficult to make forward momentum, is because you're fighting your internal critic as you're writing, you can find ways to try and turn that off as much as possible, or at least be aware that that's what's going on. Megan is asking, everyone's writing journey is unique. How long did it take for each of you to personally complete your published novels? So what I can say is that for me, the process of actually writing it was relatively short, but I was working on it in spurts. So it took several years because I didn't sit down and just finish it. I would work on it kind of obsessively for a few months and then put it aside for a long time. So it just kind of depends. I think if I could go back and do it again, I think I would probably do it more in one piece, because my writing dramatically improved every year. So it was a little bit tough to edit it that way. So PJ's asking, how does this differ from the Author Success Bundle? So this is the Author Success Bundle. This is just a exclusive price offer on the Author Success Bundle that will only be good until January 6th. So that's tomorrow at midnight. I'm into the bundle. I'm so excited to get started. Great. That's amazing, TJ. I look forward to seeing you in there. And yeah, keep in mind that the discussion areas are a really great way to get hands-on input from us about your manuscript. So yeah, Megan, months or years researching, writing, and weeks writing, definitely. Oh, TJ, sorry. What is a good target for number of pages, words a publisher likes to see? Great question. That one depends a little bit on the genre, but on average, a novel is between 80,000 and 120,000 words. So 100,000 is kind of a nice round number there. Some genres come in shorter. For instance, mysteries, especially things like cozies, might only come in at 60,000 words or so, and an epic fantasy could be much more than that. So Olivia, the novel writing workshop is a video-based course. And so it covers some of the same topics, but gets kind of different level of advice in each of them. And then of course, our genre-specific classes draw examples from those specific genres as well. Anybody else have questions that they want to throw into the chat before we end for the day? Yes, Valerie, there are 12 courses that you will get access to in the bundle. So those include our Beginning Writers Workshop, Novel Writing Workshop, Creative Writing Projects, some of our genre fiction classes, all of our genre fiction classes, including young adult, sci-fi, mystery writing, the Writing for Children. You get all of our nonfiction classes, you get all of our screenwriting classes, and you get our publishing class. Austin wants to know if we are critiquing someone's manuscript, we use Manuscript Magic. Manuscript Magic is a system and a tool that's offered by some of our colleagues over at Writing Blueprints. So that's a separate thing that is kind of a system for revisions. What tense do you recommend? Seems I can only write in past tense. The two most common tenses, well, past tense used to be the absolutely most common tense, and it probably is still the most common tense now. Present tense has gained a little bit of popularity in the last decade or so, especially in young adult fiction. You find a lot of books that are written in present tense, but it's really whatever you're most comfortable writing in. So if you write well in past tense, I think that's a fine tense to use, Dwayne. So this offer is good until January 6th at midnight, and it is good for all Writing Academy students who got the invitation for this webinar. So if you're here today, please take advantage of it, but the deal will end at midnight tomorrow. Any other questions? All right. Well, again, thank you all so much for joining us on your Saturday and taking time out of your day to think about how you're going to achieve your goals in 2019. We would absolutely love to help you do that. I hope to see you in any or all of these courses and look forward to speaking with you via the discussion areas in them. So thank you all so much. Have a great rest of your Saturday. Happy New Year and good luck with your resolutions. Take care.